The movie starts, and we see a man helping a woman run away from something in a forest. The woman falls to the ground and takes off her mask. She starts spitting out blood, and the man comes back to help her get back up. But the woman pushes him, and he falls to the ground. He gets up and starts running away, leaving the woman behind, but he hears a voice behind him. He turns around to look, and he gets shot in the eye with an arrow, and falls to the ground. We see someone in a hazmat suit getting the arrows back from their body. Then we see the forest from above. While we hear the news, we learn that there's an uncontrollable virus that wiped out the nation, and they left the cities on their own to deal with the infected people. They don't let people leave their houses, and they eliminate them with drones if they see anyone outside. Then we see a man, David, making a video call with a woman, Sam. They talk about the virus, and Sam says that they'll find a cure soon. David tells her that he has needle marks all over his arm, and they laugh. Sam coughs and tells him that she needs to go, her boss is calling her. We see an egg timer ringing, and David wakes up. He goes to reset some timers, placed next to each other. We see him 2 years later, sitting at a table and making his puzzle. One of the timers rings again, and he gets up to have his breakfast while we hear Sam's voice behind, telling him to stay isolated inside of the house and keep his strict daily routine. Another timer rings and David starts working out, while we hear Sam telling him to keep himself healthy. We see him checking for symptoms, when we hear her telling him to check for symptoms every day. He takes a shower and starts chopping some wood. We hear Sam saying that the virus he's infected with took the lives of everyone who came in contact with it, except for him. We see David Benesection himself, while Sam says that she will be studying his blood in the Eradication Control Center in DC. She tells him that he could be the key to saving them all. David wears a suit to cover himself. He puts the blood sample in an ice box and goes out in the forest to drop it. He gets to a barrel, puts the bag inside, and takes canned food while they watch him from the drone. He gets back to the house and sits at the table to make an anniversary gift, but zones out. He hears the timer ring and changes his clothes. He starts up the generator and goes downstairs to where his laptop is and starts waiting for Sam to pick up the call. We hear Sam saying that she'll call him every day. David waits, but Sam doesn't come to talk to him. We see him taking off the shirt he wore and looking outside of the window with his lamp, while we see insects outside of it and hear Sam telling him to never go out after dark. We see the man in the hazmat suit looking at David's house. Then he hears a scream coming from the woods and starts walking towards it. David wakes up the next morning and does the same things. Then we see him in front of his laptop, talking to himself, and he notices that Sam is not there again. He gets up, goes to the house phone, and starts calling the numbers on the telephone directory. He finally finds a number that rings. It goes to voicemail, and he hears the Beaumont family introducing themselves. The phone beeps, but he struggles to speak and hears the timer ringing. We see him leaving his blood sample and taking the food again. Then the timer rings again and he starts up the generator. He gets changed and hears the phone ringing. He goes to pick it up and says hello. The man on the other end asks who he is, but David doesn't answer and he hears the timer ringing. The man hangs up the phone and David runs to get his anniversary gift. Then he runs downstairs to his laptop, but he sees that the call has ended. He sits down at the chair next to the laptop and watches the wall. He falls asleep and wakes up to the timer's noise. He gets his lamp and goes upstairs. He finds the timer on the ground and it stops when he picks it up. David looks to his right and sees Sam. She laughs at him and gets inside the bathroom. He follows her, looking confused and scared. The timer on his hand rings again, and for a split second he sees Sam and the man in the hazmat suit. He wakes up and hears a noise coming from his laptop. He looks and sees Sam. She notices him and closes her camera immediately. We see David struggling to follow his routine the next day. He gets to the barrel and puts his blood sample inside. He gets the cans and yells at the drone that he's a vegetarian. He puts them back in and takes back his blood. He sees the drone outside of the house when he was chopping wood and gets inside. He goes to the windows and closes all the blinds. He finds the booklet they gave to him and starts reading it. He sees information about the disease, saying that it's bloodborne and can be transmitted through insects. Then he sees the writing on the next page, saying that the drones are for their safety. The timer rings again, and he goes to the computer. We see him talking with Sam. She asks him what he is doing, and tells him that this isn't a game, there cannot be any interruptions. It's dangerous. David asks her if she's in trouble, and Sam tells him that he has to make the drop, and asks him to fill another bag right now. David tells her to stay on the line and does it. He tells her that he trusts her, and asks her what's going on. Sam tells him that the rules are there to protect him, and she tells him to stick to the routine and don't take any risks. Then the call ends. We see David calling the man that was on the phone. He picks up, and they start talking. David asks him if he's the Beaumont in Meadow Lakes, and the man says no. He asks David how did he get his number, but David asks him if he's living near the lake, instead of answering his question. The man says yes, he thought he was the only one. David asks him where he came from, and the man says Atlanta, and there's nothing there either. He then says it's getting dark. It's not safe for them to talk. They could hear him, but David asks if he's alone. He says yes, and asks for David's name. Then he tells him that his name is Todd. David asks how he ended up there, and Todd tells him how they eradicated people with the drones. He's nothing to them, and there's a higher power which rules everything. Then Todd tells David that he hasn't eaten for days, and David tells him that he can't get there. Todd says he wasn't asking him to, But David stops him and tells him that he's infected. It doesn't affect him, but it might hurt Todd if he comes into contact. Todd asks if he tested to make sure, and asks how long has he been isolating. David says it's been 24 months, and Todd tells him that the Eradication Control Center put out tests, and they were all over the... It didn't help much at that point, but they could find out if they were infected or not for sure. We see David watching a house near the lake with his binoculars. He decides to get inside and starts looking around. He finds test kits and reads the writing on it. He reads that it might take an hour to get the results, and uses it. He takes the rest with him. Then he hears a sound outside and he gets out. We see him walking through the lake, and he sees an infected man with his face covered in blood. He makes clicking sounds with his mouth and starts walking towards David. He tells him to stop, but it starts running towards him while screaming. David falls into the water, and the man in the hazmat suit shoots the infected man in his chest with an arrow. David leaves his bag there, and tries to hide inside the tall grass. The infected man gets up again, and the man in the hazmat suit shoots him in the head this time. David uses this opportunity to get his bag and run away. He gets back to his house and lights up the lamp. He tries to calm down and mumbles to himself. He opens the blinds and sees the drone outside of the window. He turns back to his routine, and we see him doing everything frantically. He starts hallucinating, and sees Sam walking around the house and talking to him. David tells her that she's not real, and she starts teasing him while the timer starts ringing. She tells him that he always wants her to tell him what to do, and he's nothing without her. She tells him to stop the timer, and David hits it, causing him to drop the test kit. He takes it and looks at his results. He sees that he's negative, and we see him outside, hitting the timers with an axe without any protection. Then we see him talking with Sam on the laptop again. She tells him to not be outside after sundown, and tells him that he can't leave the house anymore, it's not safe. David tells her about the infected man he saw, and Sam asks if he bit or touched him in any way. David says no, and Sam lets out a sigh of relief. He asks what the disease does to these people, and Sam says she can't tell him anything else right now, they are going to clean this up. Then she tells him that she's not supposed to tell this to anyone, but they made a breakthrough. They are close to finding a cure for him. She asks him to wait a little bit longer, then they can be together again. David asks her if she's sure that he's infected. Sam doesn't answer him, and wants him to promise her that he will not leave the house again. David scoffs, says sure, and we see him looking outside at the drone. He gets his bag and puts a map, food, and medicine inside. He wears his suit and gets out of the house with his axe. He walks under the roof to not get seen by the drone. He gets inside the forest and watches the drone as it flies away. Then he starts walking and sees a campsite in front of him. He starts slowly walking towards it and finds a bloody piece of cloth with flies around it. He pulls it off and sees the man that got shot at the beginning of the movie. He gets scared and backs away. Then he starts walking towards the tents and sees the drone. He hides and sees the man in the hazmat suit coming up behind the tent with his bow and arrows. He looks around and gets inside. David gets up and starts slowly walking towards it. He gets to the door of the tent and looks inside. We see the man in the hazmat suit is actually Sam, and she's standing there with David's blood. David tries to calm her down, and Sam tells him to stay away. David tells her that it's okay, he's not infected, but Sam says that she's the one that's infected. They go back to the house and get to the room where David keeps his laptop. They start talking, and David asks why she didn't tell him. Sam says she did it to protect him, and David says he doesn't understand it. Sam tells him that she knew he wouldn't, and that's why she didn't tell him. David reaches his hand out to her to make her hold it, and Sam does. She starts crying while he hugs her. Sam tells him that she made a deal with very dangerous people, and they're eliminating everyone who's infected. David asks if it's the eradication program, and Sam says yes. David says there's no cure, and Sam says that they tried, but it all fell apart too fast. The infection rates were too high and they just started wiping everyone out. It was all she could do to keep him alive. Sam tells him that they are always watching. She panics about them finding out she's with him, then focuses on David's arm. He tries to comfort her, and Sam tells him that he's bleeding. He says it's okay, and Sam says that she's so hungry. She opens her mouth while still looking at the blood on David's arm, and he tells her that they're together now, so it will be okay. Sam says no, she needs to go back and she can't be here. She says she needs to follow the rules, she can already feel it coming, and she tells David that she's sick. David tells her that she told him he was sick, but he's not. Sam asks him if he doesn't trust her, and David smiles at her. Sam gets relieved and starts sobbing, but David uses the test kit on her and locks her in the room. Sam starts yelling his name and begging him to not leave her there. David looks in the cabinets and finds nothing but some empty cans. He goes to Sam and tells her that he will be back with some food. Then we see him walking through the forest, while we hear him leaving a voice message to Todd. He tells him that he's not infected, and asks him to come to his house, because it will be safer for them both like that. He tells Todd where his house is and hangs up. We see him looking for food back at the campsite. He gets inside of the tent and finds Sam's laptop open. He sees the recording of their first video call and watches it. He sees Sam talking with someone else through the camera when their call ends. She says that she'll get clean blood from him, enough to surpass the symptoms and send the rest to him. She says that David only trusts her, so he needs her. Then she asks if they have a deal, and the video ends. David finds other videos and starts watching them. He sees Sam in a hazmat suit in one of the videos. She says that she had been eradicating the ones who gets too close, and we see the drone footage of her shooting the infected people around his house. He watches the other videos and sees Sam's hand burning in the sunlight. He finally realizes that she is really infected and calls his laptop from Sam's. The call gets opened, and David sees Sam on the ground, starting to show symptoms. She asks for blood from him, and David says he'll come back quickly. The call ends and David sees a screen. David understands that this is how Sam talked to them. He asks what they want, and the man on the other side writes that the deal is off. We see the drone working again and coming towards the tent. David watches the drone footage through the laptop and sees that it's releasing a poisonous gas. He starts to choke, but he manages to get the gas mask on the table and put it on. He goes outside and lifts the bow to shoot it, but the drone goes away. He starts running in the forest and finds a place to hide near a cliff. He gets out to look around and hears the drone. He tries to shoot it, but the drone comes towards him and cuts his hand. David falls off the cliff and hits a rock. He manages to get back up and starts walking towards the house. David finds the door open when he gets back to the house, and he gets inside. He sees the door of the room that he locked Sam in is open, and he gets into the room. He tries to bandage his wounds and sees the same screen he saw on Sam's computer on his own laptop. He closes it and sits back down. He hears a sound from upstairs and goes there to check it. He finds a timer on the ground, just like he did in his dream, and turns to his right. He starts walking towards the bathroom and looks inside. He doesn't see Sam and turns around, but we see Sam behind him turned into one of the infected people. David hears her and stops moving. She comes up to him and hugs him from behind, while she makes clicking noises with her mouth and pretends to bite him. The timer on David's hand rings again. Sam gets scared and gets away from him. Then she screams at him, and David runs away with Sam following him. He opens the blinds, and Sam gets burned. She runs to hide in the shadow, and David sits down in front of the window. He apologizes to her and tells her that he'll give her some of his blood. Things will go back to how they were. He gets up to get the bag next to where Sam hiding. They make eye contact, and David throws his bloody bandage behind her to distract her. He gets the bag from the ground and Sam notices him. She runs towards him but stops before getting to sunlight and starts whimpering. David tries to get the needle in his arm, but he makes blood splatter around. The clouds start to go in front of the sun, and Sam screams. David runs and gets out of the house. Sam follows him and tackles him to the ground, but David manages to hold her away from him. Sam calms down and David sits up. He hugs her and Sam bites his shoulder, drinking his blood. She starts turning normal and realizes what she did to him. She starts crying and gets away from him. Then she steps out into the sunlight and starts burning. She falls to the ground, lifeless. David crawls next to her and holds her hand. Then he hears drones in the sky, and we see them lying next to each other on the ground through the drone footage. Then we see David inside of the house. He tries to eat canned food but spits it out. Then he notices that he's starting to show symptom and tests it by holding his hand out to the sunlight. His skin burns, and we see him back at the campsite, drinking the rest of his blood that Sam was drinking when he first found her. Then we see him digging a grave in the woods while shaking. He puts Sam inside, lays next to her, and starts burning because of the sunlight that's hitting to him. Then he hears drones and looks up to the sky. Then we see Todd getting inside of David's house. He walks around and we see that the house is looking better than how they left it before. Todd goes upstairs and finds some canned food with alcohol. He speaks to himself and thanks David. Then he hears the timer ringing and goes downstairs. He turns it off and sees David on the laptop. Todd sits in front of it and asks if he's David. David says no, he is Dr. Chambers. Todd asks him where David is, and he tells him that he left. Todd then asks if he's all right, and he says that they found a treatment for him. He left to go to DC, and he will be with his wife. He tells Todd that the previous generation of test kits were flawed, and everyone out there who's still alive are symptomatic carriers. They believe that he is too, but they can start the treatment for him right away. He tells Todd that there's phlebotomy equipment to his left, and he needs it to collect samples of his blood. He tells Todd that he's safe now, then says they'd better get started, and the movie ends there.